everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Angela and I'm an angelic Arcturian, and today I want to transmit to you guys about the ego. I haven't talked enough about the ego on this channel, so I wanted to make a video specifically dealing with the ego and kind of give you guys some guidance on how we deal with the ego, how we overcome it, and how we can use the ego for our advantage and how it's supposed to be used instead of the ego running rampant and doing its own wild and crazy thing like it tends to do. So if you're new to my channel, welcome. I wanted to say welcome to all the new subscribers. I haven't got a chance to do that yet, so thank you for subscribing and watching and listening and learning. And for everyone that has been faithful followers, thank you very much as well. So okay, let's get into it. What is the ego? So the ego is essentially the idea that we form about ourselves as we're growing up. It is the identity that we create from the time we're children all the way through adulthood, where we decide what we like, what we don't like, who we're gonna be, how we're gonna be that person, you know, what level of integrity we're gonna hold, like all of that stuff that we define as me actually is not you at all. It is you, but it's mostly your ego. So the ego in itself is not a bad thing, and I just really want to stress that because the ego gets a lot of criticism and negativity, but you have to understand that we form an ego so that we can stay alive. Essentially, and it also creates the experience of contrast. So we need the ego to define what's good and bad, black and white, to have that contrasting experience so that we can evolve as a soul and create lessons so that we can learn from those lessons. So we don't want to shun the ego or dislike the ego in any way, but we want to learn how to work with the ego and not let the ego run the show. So essentially, it's the part of ourselves that we believe is who we are. Like, I'm Angela. Angela is my ego identity. The person that I am underneath Angela is the soul person, the angelic, the God source fractal. Depending on how deep you want to go into who we really are, that's a totally new topic for a different video, but it's the identity that we form about ourselves. So when we become awakened, to become awakened is essentially the process of realizing that all of these thoughts that are going on within our mind, they're ego thoughts. Our ego is constantly analyzing, looking for ways to be better, to have more, to serve itself. It's very much a self-serving energy. The ego is never satisfied with whatever it does manage to create for itself. It's usually very temporary. And it's the energy of our thoughts and all the crap that's constantly going through our mind. That's our ego running that constant narrative. Who's this? What's that? What's going to happen tomorrow? When am I going to be able to do this? Does she like me? Is there grapes in the fridge? Whatever it is that's constantly going on, that is most likely, most of the time, your ego, because the soul speaks in an intuitive language, and it's just in this gentle knowing. So that's kind of how you can tell the difference between when your ego is speaking and when your soul's speaking, is your soul will be more of an intuitive just feeling or like knowing, like I gotta do this but I don't know why. That is your soul speaking. But when your ego's going, I gotta do this because I gotta pay the bills, I gotta take care of the kids, I gotta be better, I gotta have more. So when we begin to become awakened, that's when we begin to really become aware of these thought processes and we start to pay attention to them. And that's kind of the difference between someone who's asleep and someone who's awakened. Someone who's asleep completely identifies with their ego. They believe that that is who they are, that is their complete reality, and they don't believe that they exist outside of that reality. That's what keeps someone asleep. And when someone is sleeping, they are running societal conditioning, they're running corrupt trauma programs, they're running this constant fear-based narrative that's creating a lot of egoic suffering for them. And it's important to understand that egoic suffering is necessary, but part of the awakening process is starting to become aware from that suffering. So we suffer as a result of our ego, and then we begin to awaken and become aware. And part of becoming aware is becoming aware of what it is we're thinking. So we need to pay attention to what are you thinking? How are you thinking it? Are your thoughts fear-based? Are you in this constant, never-ending thought cycle of this, that, and the other that just never stops? I mean, we always have you can't stop the ego and you can't stop the mind from doing what it does. But what you really want to do is just be able to gain that control over it so that it's not controlling you. That's basically the core of the difference between being asleep and awake, is when we're asleep, we're unaware. We're unaware that we have an ego. We're unaware of our thoughts. They just go, and we listen to them. And when we become awakened, we begin to see, oh, okay, this is just a thought. This isn't who I am. I don't have to act on this. This is coming from fear. I don't have to accept this thought. I can actually, transform it into a more positive, empowering thought. So when the ego's like, oh, I'm never going to make it. I'll never be good enough. I'm always going to be a loser. We just shut that down because it's fear-based, and then we switch it to, I am going to make it. I am good enough, because that's coming from the soul. The soul is always about love, empowerment, beauty, joy. So whenever you're in that vibration and you're thinking positive and you're feeling good about yourself and you're empowering yourself, you're working from your soul aspect. But when you're over here in ego and you're afraid and you're stuck in rigid belief systems because you know it all and you've got it figured out and your way's the only way and everyone else is wrong, that's ego. And that's the ego that we want to get rid of, because overcoming the ego is about understanding that there is no right and wrong. And that can be difficult for a lot of people to understand, but it's about having an open mind and understanding that consciousness plays out in a cajillion different ways, and everyone has their own spiritual path to follow, whether it's positive or negative, and it removes you from this place of judgment and puts you in a space of not worrying about all that negative stuff, but instead focusing on how you can empower yourself, how you can grow yourself, how you can connect more to God, how you can connect more to your own soul. When you move into that vibration, then you are transcending the ego. You're separating yourself from these thought processes and this constant narrative and this fear-based just yuck. And that's always going to lead to suffering. So we want to separate ourselves from that. And awareness is the key. And once we've mastered a certain level of awareness of our thoughts, and we've learned how to take the fear out of them, meaning whenever we start going into fear-based thinking, we switch gears and we say no. Like I've said in other videos, I used to always tell myself fear doesn't live here anymore. I don't live in fear anymore. And just give myself that pep talk to pull myself out of those fearful thought cycles. And it takes practice. It is a daily practice, because the mind tends to run and sometimes it can just get away from us. But the key is to catch it and get it back into check. And once we begin to get a grip on our thoughts and our fear, then we're able to start practicing being in the present moment. And this is how we can really, really detach from our ego, is being able to quiet the mind and find stillness and understand that, today doesn't, or tomorrow doesn't matter, yesterday doesn't matter, whatever is, in the fridge, that grape that you want to eat, it doesn't matter right now. It's finding this place of detachment and just being exactly where you are. And a lot of times when we do this, we'll realize that right now in this moment, I am okay. And I've caught myself doing this like a lot, is I'll go into, oh my gosh, tomorrow. And then I have to get the reins on that and bring it in to right now, today, I'm okay. When tomorrow comes, we'll deal with tomorrow. And that's also a practice. It's not easy to do. Like, this stuff is not easy to do. Mastering your mind is a daily practice. And in order to master your mind, master your thoughts, master your ego, you have to have this constant awareness of what's going on inside your head. But once you're able to achieve that, and you're able to bring yourself out of that, it's just such a like distorted type of energy. But once you're able to just bring yourself back into that peaceful calm, and clearing your mind, detaching from the narrative, and just being present, you're really going to start to find a hell of a lot more inner peace, and you're going to suffer a lot less from the egoic mind, which means you begin to transform in a way where you don't need egoic suffering anymore to evolve your consciousness. You don't need to learn from suffering anymore. You can begin to learn to navigate from a new space of self-awareness. And that's essentially what the spiritual path is all about, is learning how to separate ourselves from the thoughts, remember who we really are behind the thoughts, and be able to tap into that more and more and more, and begin to move towards navigating in higher frequencies, navigating outside of the egoic perception. And that's, what ascension is all about, is moving into who we really are with a conscious awareness in physicality. I mean, that is a huge accomplishment. So anyone that's awakened, that's huge. There are so many people, look around, that have not awakened yet. They're still suffering from their egos, but they're trying to get to a point where they can be awakened. And that's why we have to be really compassionate towards those who have not yet awakened. And sometimes there can be sort of a negativity towards people who are unawakened, but they're trying to get there just as you did. They're trying to understand just as you did. And so it's really important that we have compassion for the people who have not yet attained self-awareness. And you're going to go in and out of ego. You're still a human being. While you're navigating this, you're going to catch yourself in times where you're going to go into your ego, and that's perfectly normal and fine. Just don't beat yourself up when you do. Just become aware of it, become conscious of it, and correct it. And that's what awareness is all about. And consciousness is essentially awareness. So if you're conscious, you're aware. And that's what the spiritual journey is all about. But if you don't do the trauma work, you are only going to cultivate a spiritual ego. So you have to do the trauma work as well, and you have to master your thinking and become really aware of your thinking. Because people who try to skip the trauma work just end up with a spiritual ego, and they're still running around with the same egoic perception, distorted by all of their own trauma. So it's important that we do the shadow work, we heal our trauma, like it all goes together. If you try to skip any part of it, you're just going to end up with a distorted egoic perception, and that's not what we want. We want to get on the path of divine light and love so that we can bring joy and high vibrations to the world and help this planet ascend, help evolve consciousness, and do what we came here to do. So if you're fairly new to the spiritual path and you're just kind of starting to figure things out, and you're wondering what the ego is and what is all this talk about the ego, that's essentially what it is. And the ego has the power to really distort our perception, especially if we have unresolved trauma and that sort of thing. So it's important that we learn how to navigate the ego, but we begin to learn how to work with the ego. And that means just understanding the ego's job. And the ego's job is to keep you alive and to create contrasting experiences for you. But once we've transcended the ego, we don't need to learn through that contrast anymore. We learn through different frequencies and different ways of evolving, which are more consciousness related and reaching higher and higher vibrations and states of consciousness versus the constant back and forth with the ego. You're still going to have that at times, but the goal is to try to really separate yourself from that and then be able to be in balance with it. When the ego starts going on a tangent, you can come in and be like, yo, slow down. This isn't real. Like, you're just going off on your little tangent. So, it's a process of balancing. As with everything on the spiritual path and in life, it's always about finding balance with everything. So I hope that gives you some idea and some, perception of kind of how the ego works and how we can overcome it in our practice by simply just becoming aware of our thoughts. It's such a crucial part of this journey, and it's a great place to start, especially if you're new to the practice. So I wish you guys the best of luck. Leave me a comment if you have any questions, and I'll see you next time.